Hi, this is Beth Reimer with the Ohio Writing Project, and I am working with the National Writing Project with their College Ready Writers program. And I want to talk today about creating a culture of argument in a class, which sounds like it might be a bad thing, but actually it's a good thing. So, one way that we can create a culture of argument in a classroom is by daily or frequent argument writing. So what we're talking about overall is this what? With the I3 Year 2 program goal of routinely teaching argument writing. And this idea that students read and write arguments daily or frequently. Either way we want to think about that. But enough that they're really getting practice, right? It's this idea that's true about writing just as it is about athletics or music or hobbies or art, that the practice of anything is really important. It's as important as the teaching we might do. For example, if I ask students to only write an essay and teach them through it once, it's just like my daughter getting ready for a basketball game with one practice where I just teach her start to finish of what will happen in the game. But that's not enough. I need to teach her some moves, and I need to teach her some routines, and I need to teach her the rules and what it looks like and all kinds of things. So it's this goal of routinely teaching argument writing, and one of the ways that we do that is to read and write arguments daily. But we might ask ourselves why. So why would we do this relates a lot to our I3 Year 2 big picture goals. One of the things that we know is that we want students to think of themselves as future citizens of this democracy, of this world we live in. This idea that thoughtful citizens read, analyze, think about arguments daily, about what they hear, what they take in, what they forward on their social media, what they engage in as thinkers. And we want them to be part of that. In the same vein, we want students to think of themselves as learners. This idea that thinking about argument really stretches critical thinking capacities in a way that just doing a one-time persuasive paper doesn't. It really asks students, when we create a culture of argument, to analyze and to think about what arguments they see in their world, what claims are being made, and how they respond to them. And that's all this why, this big picture. But of course, we're left with the how. And that how is huge, right? This how has so much to do with an everyday classroom. Because if we think about the idea of creating daily or frequent argument writing attached to nonfiction, the idea seems, number one, overwhelming, and perhaps even impossible. And it really would be impossible and absolutely overwhelming. If we thought about this kind of daily or frequent argument writing around nonfiction as separate from everything else we're asking students to do as readers and writers, it's overwhelming if it's little separate individualized bell ringers that don't connect to any of the reading, writing, thinking that we're asking students to do. And it is overwhelming if we are imagining only one possibility for daily argument writing, like prompts. But this idea of argument writing at the Ohio Writing Project, we think of it more in layers, that there's categories of thinking and planning in order to create a culture of argument. And one of the ways we do that is through daily or frequent argument writing. But there's layers of this daily and frequent argument writing because it's not just a one-time moment. Instead, it's this idea that students have to practice, and it's this idea that argument is at the core of who we are as students and people because we engage in arguments all our life. And it's this idea that there's all kinds of arguments in the world. Arguments that relate to students' everyday lives, arguments that relate to texts that we might read, arguments that are spoken, arguments that are written, arguments that are cartoons, arguments that are short, arguments that are long. And so if we open the possibilities, open the categories of thinking and planning for creating a culture of argument, then it no longer becomes overwhelming, and it no longer becomes impossible. So what are some of those categories? One of the categories might be this idea of arguments in students' lives. If we can help students see that they already are surrounded by arguments, places they take stances and have beliefs that might be different than others or might be the same and that always have reasons, we can help them see that they're actually part of argument always. And this doesn't have to be tricky, right? We can have them do this with generative kind of writing that already happens in the writer's notebook. For example, I have my students create topic lists of things they could write about, or lists of I believe statements, or even some prompts from the world. All of those could be turned into argument topics. So for example, when I click over here, I see a student example of a schedule of my day. And yes, schedule is spelled incorrectly at the top in kind of a funny way, because this student actually said that she does dual with her day sometimes. So I simply asked the student to write down the schedule of her day. And she wakes up at 5:30, she has breakfast at 5:45, she puts on her makeup at 6, she goes to the bus stop at 6:20, and she goes all the way through her day. History, Spanish, science, life lessons, cross country, watching Gossip Girl here at the bottom, getting her sisters, after school tutoring. And then you might notice something really interesting. You see these A's here? That means that I asked the student to go back and code her schedule of the day. Where does she have an argument that she'd make that maybe others don't agree with? Or where would she make a claim about something she believes in or doesn't believe in around this topic? And you'll see that she has an argument next to breakfast because she has an argument as to whether or not she should have to eat breakfast. She has an argument around makeup, about its use and how much, and whether it's a gender issue or not. She has lots of arguments around that. She has arguments around Spanish and the work she has to do in Spanish, arguments around after school tutoring and the volunteering. You'll see she saw that she has lots of arguments. With a little bit of writing time, she's already making lots of claims with one quick write. So what we might want to do as one way to get into daily argument is leverage the kinds of things we already have them do in their notebook and help them find some arguments there. Another way that we might create a culture of argument, another category, is helping students notice arguments in the world. And when we think about arguments in the world, what we want them to think about is surrounding students with these arguments that are around them every moment. They just have to look at a headline, a song, their Twitter feed, advertisements, cartoons, anything has arguments, claims, stances being made. Now, they don't always give their reasons, and they certainly don't always back it up with research, but there's a beginning claim being made. And it's good for students to notice that their world is already surrounded by arguments. So again, this doesn't have to be hard. This can be something that happens in their writer's notebook where I show them an example and we look at it and say, what claim is being made? How do you know that's the claim? And then with a little bit of writing, we can have them respond to it to see whether they agree or disagree or if they have a different perspective or a different stance. And then again, they have seed arguments for them to use later. And more importantly, they're starting to interact with the world around them. This doesn't have to be hard. For example, if I show you this over here to the side, this is actually a fast food cup from Fazoli's. And I've taken a photo or screenshot there of a piece of it. And you can read it and you can notice that there's a claim there. Now we know it's a claim for the restaurant itself, that it's a great place to be. But there's this other claim about food. And if you read the whole cup, you see they're making this claim about the importance of sitting down together, of not eating in your car, of taking the time to eat a meal as a family as opposed to running through. In fact, on the side, you see it says that it's a minivan, not a mini dining room. So I was sitting with my daughters who are third grade, eighth, seventh grade, and 10th grade. And after reading this cup, we had a 10-minute conversation about the value of eating dinner together, an argument in the world. Another category might be oral arguments that we make. And these are quick speeches students can do. I love these. These might be my favorite because I can practice with students to get them really quickly making a claim, giving me some reasons on anything. We could have just attended a spirit assembly and I could gather them all back and I can say, we just spent an hour at a spirit assembly. I want us to make a quick claim speech about whether or not spirit assemblies are useful for school and what you think about them and what your reasons might be. Give them 30 seconds. They do a 1 minute, 2 minute speech. They're practicing constantly this idea of making a claim, having a focus topic, having reasons, and even having some evidence. And I can stretch it by giving them a little piece of text, a short one, and then asking them to practice a quick speech about their perspective on the issue. And then they can even practice sentence frames like according to the article or in contrast to, or although the article says this, I think such and such. This whole idea of oral composing and orally saying an argument helps students internalize the kind of vocabulary and the language that we want students to use in writing. And they can be quick and they can be daily and they're doing the work of argument. Another possibility would be response to a single text. And this is where I might move students to a longer argument, where I let them read a 1 to 2 page article. It might be nonfiction or it might be an argument itself. They can practice with a reading strategy to code the text, to find the claim, to note the evidence, to find lines worth responding to. And then they, in their own writer's notebook or in a page that's to a 1 page or 2 turn in, they can give a response that includes support from the text. This is an idea where a lot of people have used Kelly Gallagher's article of the week to help students practice making your own argument in relation to a text. Closely related to that might be response to a text pair or a text trio. So moving from a single text, I have students pair a text together, maybe an infographic in an article or a image and a cartoon or a video or a essay or an op-ed or 2 perspectives on a topic. But just 2 or 3, not tons. And in this small text pair or text trio, students again practice the idea of reading somebody else's words and arguments, synthesizing, choosing a claim of their own, noticing other people's claims, choosing source material, figuring out text structures for source material, and they're able to layer on ideas and thinking in order to get to a claim or get to a response. Both the response to a text, single text and text pair could be done in your notebook. It could be done and not always collected, or it could be done on a Google Doc. But maybe you do 2 or 3 through daily argument practice stretched across some days, and then they choose 1 for us to revise and to teach through. In the same manner, we might already be doing the work of argument in our class. If we're working through a mini unit or a certain genre like an op-ed or a review, then all the teaching that we're already doing is already doing the work of argument writing for that day. And finally, we think about the idea of practicing argument moves. Perhaps there's some hard things that we want students to do, such as using other people's words. When that's the case, maybe we can have them practice pulling out a line from one of the texts they read earlier. And what happens when you use it to expand? What happens when you borrow a word? What happens when you counter it? What happens when you use it to illustrate? This helps students in their writer's notebook play around with the tough things that we ask students to do in argument. And it doesn't always have to be graded, but lots of daily practice. In the end, perhaps daily argument writing isn't as overwhelming. And here's some resources to get you started. Good luck and happy arguing.